We'll get started with proceedings very soon. I'm Jonathan Warren, Chief Executive of the independent place-focused, place-obsessed think tank, Localist. It's very good to see so many faces here. We just had a technical issue. We were looking to this to be our second live stream, and to my horror, we were being Zoom bombed, an experience I've never experienced before. But it's nice seeing genuine faces who aren't replicas of me impersonating me. It's good to see different people here for our second live in-person event of the Conservative Party Fringe. So, it's 12 o'clock, it's high noon, I think it's time we got on with the show. Welcome to Reforming and Renewing Social Care, the Local Economic Opportunity. This Fringe, Localist is doing in partnership with the Living Wage Foundation. I was on the Fringe with Izzy yesterday on that ubiquitous, inescapable subject of levelling up. And those social care, a big part of everything in this. So I'm very glad we have an opportunity to focus on social care in its own right, and also as a part of our integral part of our local economy. Back in the ancient history, 4 years ago, when we had an industrial strategy that was an industrial strategy, we'll have to see what Kwasi Kwarteng does with the bays renamed. Clearly, he's got an act to follow. Can it be as good as Deluxe, as we're going to have to call the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities? But no, social care was a vertical there. It was an integral part of it, and given the importance, given how the sheer demographic pressure we're facing as a nation, given the need to drive great innovation through social care, as they've done so successfully in Japan, given what we can learn, and given what we've gone through in COVID, where we remember from March, April, May, the great concern was what's going on in our care homes. How are we looking after the most vulnerable? This is something that has to be addressed. So essentially what we want to get from this hour's worth of dialogue and exchange amongst each other and with you is to really, let's come to a picture. Can we paint a golden vision for what a successful future for social care could look like? No small task. I think we're up for this. So, taking inspiration from the lessons learned recently, can we make, as a Localist, we're localist advocates, champions, can we make an exciting localist and radical case for a step change in innovation around social care, which will be, in our previous Fringe earlier, we were talking about the fiscal steps, the rise in NI, how difficult this is all going to be for all of us. And reading the Times today, the social care precept might be uncapped to pay for this. How can we drive innovation for places, for people, that has economic and civic growth and people at its very heart? So, what would a successful future for social care look like? We're going to ask things like, how can homegrown talent build back better in social care? Can we grasp the skills nestled on this, improve how we're training our social care workers? Can we marry local recovery in our places with unlocking people potential? Can we use it as a way for fast-tracking, capable, dynamic young people as leaders in social care in the future? What would a better resourcing picture look like? Would it give us a better opportunity for more cost-effective social care? And finally, what is the right balance between local powers, discretion for local leaders like Elizabeth and Izzy, to play with elements of investment, skills and decent living wages to ensure that our social care workforce of the future is well trained, highly waged, and we change the perception and the reality of how we do this. So if you're in agreement, this is going to be what we'll be doing for the next hour. Great pleasure to be have a top panel to give many different viewpoints on this issue. First up, we have Edel Anawabi, Associate Director for Citizens UK. Associate Organiser. I'll read my script, sorry Ella. also have on my right friend of the localist, Councillor Elizabeth Campbell, in your position as Chair of Central London Forward, as well as leader of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. I have Dr. Keith Hepton, Care Sector Campaign Lead for the Living Wage Foundation, and alphabetically finally, but certainly more than that, Councillor Izzy Sekum, leader of the LGA Conservative Group and leader of Warwickshire County Council. So thank you very much to our panel. I have a rule with our panel, so I can't be accused of being manipulative. We all do it in alphabetical order. So Adele, if I can ask you to set the tone with your marvellous speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I've already been introduced, and I'll apologize in advance that in an attempt to address what the question that Jonathan has put, it will be as erratic as the wages that the care workers get. So it's in an abstract way, and that reflects just how much the care worker earns anyway. So I'll start in my own way. I'm not eating these biscuits as a meal because I want. My husband is bedbound. My son was diagnosed with cancer and depressed, that's indoors. That son eventually died, committed suicide during the pandemic. If I spend more than 50p on myself, how will I manage rent, food, and other skills? That is Kay, I'll call her Kay, a care worker. I am Idel, as you said, a care worker organizer, campaigning for voluntary living wage for care workers across the UK. While the national living wage is set through government, the voluntary living wage is set independently and calculated based on the actual cost of living. At the height of COVID-19 pandemic, I was engaged as a care worker in Wales, contracted COVID, and thus initiated my involvement in the voluntary living wage campaign. Citizens Camry requested me as one of its leaders to use my personal experience to support and engage with other care workers. The testimonies gathered enabled us to engage with the Welsh Assembly. In the recently concluded elections, we met with all the major parties and each committed to funding social care. Citizens UK have been advocating for a living wage for care workers and are working with a broad alliance of national leaders and care providers around this campaign. A care manager from London felt more can be done to uplift the life of care workers in terms of pay, training, and facilitation. That's a quote. A care worker in Wales said, if only they paid as well, I could have time to spend with my grandchildren, go for refresher courses, and even a week or two away holiday time with my family. Quote. A care home owner confessed that they were willing to pay the voluntary living wage if the local councils facilitated the private owners. The average pay in UK amongst most care companies is £8.50, which is not sustainable for most care workers unless they work overtime. That is 50 plus more hours a week. Care workers work overtime to pay that is equivalent to care workers in the NHS. This has many negative effects, such as loss of motivation, passion, increased stress, fatigue, and in general health deteriorates, all of which can lead to a lower standard of service and huge turnovers. The moral case for paying a voluntary living wage is clear. It is the right thing to do for care workers so that they are paid a wage to meet their everyday needs. Care workers have been on the front line during the pandemic and continue looking after our loved ones. It is only right they are fairly paid. Carol from Manchester testified and participated in several petitions requesting the government to endorse and enable a voluntary living wage. We medicate, give personal care, feed, do activities, shop, cook, and any other required duty to give the recipients dignity and comfort, but nobody seems to care about our comfort and dignity. Why is it important to pay the voluntary living wage? It will attract staff and address the vacancy gap in social care jobs. With staff turnover rates as high as 38% for care workers in the sector and vacancies of 112,000, that is research done by Skills for Care. There is a need to attract and retain staff in the sector. Public support also. 89% of adults in the UK support key workers such as cleaners, care workers, and couriers being paid at least the voluntary living wage. That is research done by Salvation. Our plea to the Conservative MPs is please to support our call for a voluntary living wage for care workers. As the UK recovers following the pandemic, it is vitally important to acknowledge the value of care workers through a proper pay. Good, well-paid jobs in social care will help tackle unemployment challenges and support local economies, particularly in areas of the UK where there's a growing demand for but lack of care workers. The care workers are skilled in multitasks and deserve a pay that reflects their input to society and economy. Training, well-being support, and a rewarding career without a voluntary wage is like offering a guest a good kettle of tea without a cup. Do I have a minute to?
You've got a minute, thank you. Carry on, it's great, isn't it, everyone? Thank you.
Thank you. Just one statement that I'd like to read over for you. Over 1.5 million strong social care workforce is an essential part of the social care system. Social care workers are at the front line, caring for and supporting people at the heart of their communities. A qualified and skilled workforce that is rewarded and feels valued is essential for high-quality care that is sensitive to individual needs. We will therefore make care work a more rewarding vocation, offering a career where people can develop new skills and take on new challenges as they become more experiences. This will include a plan to support professional development and the long-term well-being of the workforce. That's another quote. Something of importance to the care workers is missing in that whole statement. We are talking about training, well-being, but not talking about how their pockets are going to be happy. And I think the pocket of the care worker, through the living wage, being happy, made happy, will more or less contribute to the well-being and someone being able also to concentrate in their training. And for now, let me stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Many thanks, Adele, for setting the tone and for that the emphasis on comfort and dignity in all this. Thank you very much. Next great pleasure to invite Councillor Elizabeth Campbell to say your piece. Please do.
Thank you. So as well as being the leader of Kensington and Chelsea Council, I'm the chair of Central London Forward, which is a sub-region of 12 authorities in the centre of London. And our whole thing is really working with boroughs to try and have inclusive growth so we have more opportunities so our residents can thrive. We have one in 10 of the jobs in the UK are in Central London Forward boroughs. And of those jobs, we're now finding it very difficult to fill are, of course, social care workers. We've got huge recruitment and retention problems, as you have across the country. I've looked at figures, 11% vacancies across the country. That's 100,000 care workers that we're missing at the moment. And in London, it's even worse than that, because every year, 3 out of 10 leave the profession. So we're very proud in KNC that we are a London living wage employer, and the majority of Central London Forward boroughs are as well. But across London, 9 out of 10 care workers in the capital are paid below the London living wage. So you've got a combination of low pay, you've got 0 hours contracts, and previously everyone would say, well, EU migrants would fill the space. And again, nationally in England, it's 7% were EU migrants who were care workers. In London, it was 13%. It's a huge issue for us. And previously, where people would say, well, we've lost so-and-so, so, Polly from Poland can come in and fill the gap. But that actually, I'm beginning to think, is an opportunity for us, because we do need to train our own homegrown care workers. I would say that, government's recognising this, and I have to say, good on them, right? Everyone else has looked at this challenge for many years and sort of shirked it. And they are giving us more money, but that's an issue because we're not quite sure how much money is going to the NHS and where it's coming to us. We're very pleased that we're going to have more funding so people don't have to sell their own homes. But again, we're looking forward to the spending review to see quite how that's all going to pan out and what allocations are going to come to local authorities, whether we're going to have to put up taxes. But in addition to all of that stuff, I think one thing we can do as local authorities is really focus on our workforce. So certainly in central London, we've got a health and social care outcomes agreement. So basically we brought together local authorities, skilled providers, care providers to look at, what are the gaps, what is the quality, what is the career progression. Because I absolutely accept what Adele says. It is about pay, but it's also about better training, it's about better job opportunities, and it's about a proper career within the care service. So I think if we get all those things right, we can improve the attraction of the sector, and we can at the same time improve the quality of care.
Thank you very much indeed, Elizabeth. Next, I'm going to invite Dr. Keith Hepton to take up the strain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jonathan. Really pleased to be with you and see so many people turn out for this. That it demonstrates what we've discovered at the Living Wage Foundation, that doing something to reform social care has become an increasing priority over the past 18 months or so. We represent here, as you can see on the panel, the Living Wage Foundation and local authority, but I'm aware of the last year of working with care providers that care providers in the private sector, as well as care providers that provide exclusively through local authorities, all want to do something to raise wages. Could I just see who is here in the room from providers, from care providers, just in case? They're not. Well, we've spent the last 18 months working hard with care providers, and I have to say that they are really keen, and I'll come to that more in a minute, but we'll make sure that they are represented in what I say, because they're really enthusiastic about this too. So at the Living Wage Foundation, we have 20 years of experience of listening carefully to businesses and workers to find out the impact and value of a living wage on the real cost of living. We know from different sectors we work with that the voluntary living wage is good for staff retention and quality of work, and it's good for families, because it allows the worker enough money to have the time and resources to raise a family. It began, in fact, with a story of a young man who was at school in East London who said he barely saw his mum because she had 2 jobs. She was out at work when he left for school, and she didn't get back until it was bedtime. And a real living wage allowed her to just work 1 job and see her family. It's good for the local economy because the money earned by the low-wage earners is spent locally. If we want to level up and build back better for hard-working families, then the voluntary living wage has been proven to be the answer time and again. But at the Living Wage Foundation, we've been digging deep into the particular problem that's vexed governments and is finally being taken seriously by our current government. How do we reform and rebuild social care? So you will be, I've no doubt, familiar with the dilemma or the trilemma around this. Care providers, seeing at least 30% turnover of staff, want to pay more but don't get enough money from local authorities to do so. Local authorities want to fund a living wage, but don't have the funds from Westminster to do so. And Westminster would like to release the funds, but cannot force local authorities or private providers to spend it on wages, and so are often reluctant. So wherever we go with this, over the past 10 years that we've been working on this, we've found that each case, they're saying, well, the problem is over here, somewhere else in that triangle. The IPPR calculates it would cost an extra 445 million to fund a voluntary living wage in England. And this would benefit around 500,000 workers. Westminster can release the funds, but they want to know the following. Will it land in the pockets of care workers and not simply in the profits of care providers? Will it have a measurable impact on the quality of care? And will it be financially sustainable? So first, if government supports local authorities to fund a voluntary living wage, will it get into the pockets of care workers? Well, the Conservative Party in Wales believes so. In fact, all the major parties in Wales committed this year to funding social care to at least the living wage. They've been rolling this out and will roll it out formally from April next year for the following 2 years, with a pledge to get every care worker paid a living wage by 2024. Scotland has already started funding a living wage in care. There have been some issues along the way, and we're learning from those. And Northern Ireland is committed to being a living wage employer. So the only nation that has yet to commit to paying care workers a voluntary living wage is England. Not that it's a competition, but England. So, furthermore, we have over a decade of experience helping local authorities to include the living wage in any contracts they tender and have a toolkit to support them to do this. Accreditation of health boards and local authorities is the best way to guarantee a voluntary living wage in the sector that does not compromise the tendering process. Furthermore, there is a green paper transforming public procurement which will make it easier to put those kind of values into the public sector contracts and for local authorities to stipulate a living wage. A tangible benefit of Brexit, if you're looking for one. Second, will the voluntary living wage have a measurable impact on the quality of care? So unlike the national living wage, there is no legal requirements for businesses to pay the voluntary living wage, but every year thousands of businesses see the value of the living wage for themselves. Around a third of FTSE 100 companies are accredited with us. In the past year, we've seen more care providers accredit as living wage employers than the whole of the previous 10 years put together. That's the wage rises that our Prime Minister is talking about. Why? Well, we know that the real living wage improves retention rates. One trust-based care provider who recently accredited have seen that turnover of staff went down to just 12% within the first year of paying a voluntary living wage. While another in this region, Aspire in Swinton, have seen staff turnover drop to just 8% on setting the voluntary living wage as a minimum pay for care staff. It's fantastic that our government has committed £500 million to invest in training and progression in social care, but if we want to make sure this funding for training is well spent, we need to make sure that the people we train stay in the job. So that means better wages. Third, is voluntary living wage sustainable? Well, the Resolution Foundation tells us that nearly half of the extra money put into wages in the sector will be returned to the Treasury as tax receipts and reduced benefit costs. If we can reduce staff turnover nationally from 30% to 12%, then training and recruitment costs will be saved. And if we have workers spending their local pound in their communities, we will see thriving local economies. Not only is a voluntary living wage sustainable, it's vital if we're going to sustain and grow our economy. Our Prime Minister hit the headlines this week saying that wages were the most important metric. And it seems he's right. That's because he knows that fairness now is better than charity later. We'd like to see this principle put into action in England to match the commitments from our other nations. We want to see a voluntary living wage in care so that we can build back better.
Many thanks. Okay, it's great pleasure now. You, last as always, Councillor Izzy Sekum, leader of the LGA's Conservative Group, leader Warwickshire County Council, please.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Welcome, everybody, and such an important subject for local government in particular. When we think of the percentage of spend, this is the greatest percent of our money is spent on this. So I'm conscious that the most important part is your questions, so I'll quickly gallop through this. So adult social care provision is an economic opportunity rather than an economic cost. It is a chance for us to use homegrown talent to build back better. It's estimated to contribute £46.2 billion to the economy on an annual basis and supports 603,000 jobs through indirect spending, as well as 1.2 million that are directly involved in the sector. However, there is currently an estimated turnover rate, we've heard about that, in social care of 30.4%, alongside a vacancy rate of 7.3%, and it is that 100 million that Elizabeth talked about. If we want our local people to join the workforce, we must recognise the parity of esteem between the workforces of social care and health. And that is a matter that is truly important in the front line. We therefore welcome the government's outlined action on the workforce in their proposals to reform social care, including the £500 million to support training, staff wellbeing and recruitment. However, the plan says nothing about social care workforce pay conditions, and it is so important for tackling the well-known issues around recruitment and retention. I'd also like to touch briefly on the government's proposals for reform and funding social care, which are potentially important first steps to changing the way social care is paid for by the people who draw on social care and our funding. However, and another however, in local government, we are very concerned that the question of whether they make the kind of progress needed to help adult social care deliver for people is delivered. We need more clarity on how the proportion of the levy earmarked for social care in the first 3 years, that's the £5.4 billion that was mentioned out of the £12.4 billion, breaks down against the various commitments and initiatives the government has announced. We need the spending review to deliver genuine new funding to stabilise the system. And I have to say, we have had 18 months of COVID. We have a workforce that is tired, is exhausted, is traumatised in many cases, and we've heard from the front line how challenging it is to actually meet the everyday pay needs and living costs. And we know that they could go out and work in one of our main supermarkets for more money and less pressures and less trauma. And yet we're asking them to do the most important job for the most vulnerable people of our society. And is this right? And why have we, for 10 years, been talking about this and not reforming this? There is money coming in, but I challenge you that this money that's coming in to local government, supposedly, comes with a caveat. So the National Insurance Uplift contribution has a cost to that. Arguably, the element that local government will have to cover will be paid for, we're told. Wait and see. We're told that, but we contract most of our services, so the providers are not going to be they're not going to be covering those costs. They're already pared to the bone. So the challenge for us is, can we afford the new costs for the national insurance contribution that will be paid? Can we also manage the capacity around 100% of the needs of people, whereas currently we are dealing with 20% of those who are not self-funders? We are now going to have to manage 100%. Now, where is the workforce for this? Where is the capacity to deal with it? Is there an expectation that access to the same charges that we in local government pay is going to be sustainable? Because we already know that self-funders are subsidising the marketplace. So all of these are really challenging questions, and at first gallop through the money, it looks like the element that comes towards local government is negative. So then we look at the adult social care precept, the council tax, potentially lifting the cap on that. And actually it's a real challenge, because I think we said we'd fix social care. And yet when they get their bills for the NI and they get their bills for the adult social care precept, there may be a few gasps. So all of these are the challenges that we in local government are going to have to face in February next year.
Thank you very much. Well, huge thanks to our panel for setting the topic out so well, from local leadership expertise as well as frontline experience. We've got half an hour for vibrant exchange and dialogue. Tanique has the roving microphone. My request is this: if you have a question, put your hand up and ask it. We will find you. If you have a statement that's more of a statement than a question, well, give your statement, but keep it brief. We want questions. So please, hands up, please, for the first round of questions. Lady at the front, the two gentlemen behind. We'll take it three at a time. Thank you.
I just want to ask a question about providers, we keep talking about money, but as you mentioned, Keith, it's about how you spend that money. Now, I work with a lot of social enterprises, 76% of which paid a living wage to Living Wage Foundation's living wage. The data on employee-owned mutual provided social care is that they are the best rated and generating the most efficiency and productivity. So rather than just seeing this as a problem of spending money, what does the panel think about getting some of the private equity firms, some of the more poor performing private sector firms, and even some of the councils which are poorer providing, and switching them over to more dynamic provision like social enterprise, like mutuals, which on paper appear to be paying the living wage and delivering the kind of efficiencies that you're looking to achieve?
Thank you very much indeed. Gentleman.
John Poman from Carers UK. Izzy, I just wanted to ask you, you just said that you thought the government should be putting in more money for local government in the spending review. I just wondered how much money you think needs to be provided.
You want a quantum, do you? Quantum aside. Lady.
Hi, Janet Williams from Wales, Carers Wales. How long does the panel anticipate it will take to train homegrown care workers, and what solutions would they suggest in the meantime to plug the gap? Also, will this be possible without the living wage?
Many thanks. Well, we've got three questions. I'll ask to the panel, starting with Keith coming across. Like a Woolworths pick and mix, Keith, any or all of the questions. So first question asking about, can we have a more dynamic form of provision in the marketplace? Do you have a quantum of social care funding you'd like from the spending review on the 27th of October? And no, how long will it really take to train the new workforce we're looking for?
Thank you. So I can say that there are people working on new, innovative and disruptive ways of doing, disruptive in the positive sense, ways of delivering social care and digitisation of provision, there are like cost savings and more efficient ways of doing things. That's definitely the case. And I can perhaps introduce you to somebody who's done some real work on digitisation, for example, if you want to speak afterwards. On the cost, is it the cost of funding a voluntary living wage for the whole of UK is estimated at £1.4 billion extra money, according to the Resolution Foundation. But there are other costs which council leaders here, beyond the wage stuff, that they'll want to talk about as well.
Many thanks, Keith. Elizabeth.
Sorry, Janet, I don't know the answer to your question.
Well, I was going to answer Janet's question.
Great.
Oh, excellent.
So I think, absolutely, you've got to have a proper living wage. So I think that's the first thing. But in London, it's difficult for us too, because the cost of living in London is so high and the cost of transport for people is so high. So what we need to look at is this homegrown talent bit. And there are opportunities there. So, for example, with more and more direct payments, we're saying to people, you know, you're getting a direct payment to look after your daughter. Well, if you've got a bit of spare time, can you also look after some other people on your street? Have you got, you know, there's stuff around that we can do. We're also saying things like we have maternity champions and health champions coming out of the recovery who've been fantastic, getting us into bits of the community which wouldn't necessarily engage with us. And again, we're now having a council coordinator to look at them, to build them up, and then saying, you know, you're doing this, that's great. Well, how about you shift over? Is there something else you can do? Or when you're having a coffee with Mrs. Mohammed next week, ask her whether she's interested in doing social care. And it's, again, this whole thing about hyper-local. So if you're helping granny or helping a friend, well, be paid for it and go around the corner and do it for someone else. And we're finding that really quite helpful. Because and for us, it's fantastic. Because rather than having health workers who are spread all over London, who may get in or may not get in, etc., they're home-based. So much, much, much more convenient for us as well. So we think it's a great opportunity.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good answer. Nice to have a hyper-local solution from our perspective. Thank you very much. Adele, any like to answer any of those questions in terms of the training one's probably the most pertinent. What do you...
About the training? Yeah. What I would say, the training I think is very important for the care workers. Like I think at the moment in Wales, the social care Wales, what they are doing now is ensuring that all the care workers by 2020, next year, 2022 are all trained. Mm-hmm. Because you must be trained in order to be registered and they will not employ anyone who is not registered. Or maybe they will, but they are saying they will not employ anyone who is not registered. But at the same time, I would still go back to the speech that I read earlier about training being offered and well-being being offered. It's not enough to be trained and for your well-being to be taken care of if you're not feeding well. Because as much as I will still go to it, because as much as we are insisting, like, I'd like to be trained, because I'm a care worker also. I want to be trained. I have been trained, but if I still go to my 8.75 pay, to be able to be given the well-being services, it's still now misusing funds that should not have been. Because if I'm paid well, I will not have to utilize that facility of well-being. And obviously, I'll already be trained. So I'll say that training is important. It's essential, very essential for each and all of us to have it. But I will still say the bottom line is, are we being trained so that we're not paid well, so that we can pay more taxes and still go back to, if possible, to £8? Or are we being trained so that we are also getting a much better pay than what we are getting now? For me, that's what is important.
Thank you very much indeed. Izzy, 3 weeks' time, we've got the spending review. Can I ask the big money question for you first?
Big money question, absolutely. Can I give you a few graphs too? So over the last decade, the adult social care cost pressures have increased by 8.5 billion. The total funding actually has increased by 2.4. So there's a fairly obvious gap there of 6.1 billion, and that needs to be managed. And of that, 4.1 has been managed through savings, and that's one of the reasons why we're challenged on the pay. But 2 billion was managed through money being taken from other services. And there are other really important services that help to keep people at home and give them quality of life for as long as possible. So immediately now, we need 1.5 just to save billion to stabilise the market. And ongoing, we need just over 1 billion per year to fix the market. I wanted to pick up on the question about dynamism and looking at new opportunities. I do think local authorities of necessity are doing that. I mean, money, challenges around money are a driver for invention, and I would argue isn't always quite the same in the health service. If you don't have to fit the bill, then you haven't got the driver for change. And that has been the creative innovator that we've had. There are changes happening, and to be honest, they've always happened, and they need to continue to happen to be relevant to the generation that you're looking after. When I was first looking at social care over 10 years ago, we in my council had our own care homes. They were costing us 40% more than the marketplace that we were buying beds in. And, there was a cost necessity driver there. That we need to look at new opportunities, but the market has also, certainly with some of the big providers, has actually effectively divested themselves of their assets to put money back into the operational costs, which has then made them vulnerable. And we need to have a stable market, and it's not there at the moment.
Thank you very much. That's a good first wave of questions. Do we have any more? And the same question goes out to those following on live stream, provided they don't soon bomb us over here. Let's have some more hands up, please. Go on, you know you want to.
For matching carers and patients, and they've managed to achieve a average compensation for carers of about £16.50 an hour against the national average of £9. So we really believe this is a scalable model that can make a real change and difference. And I just wanted to highlight, as a Conservative, I'm constantly looking to the private market to innovate and using technology to find solutions like this. So sorry for the question.
Gentleman there. Thank you, Tanique.
Just to follow up on some of your answers, though, I wanted to ask about private equity, particularly in this space, because Izzy, I think you made a great point about the necessity of money, but there was some research done last year, I think by the Centre for Public Health, which found that on average, we're paying, in a private equity-owned home, we're paying almost £80 a week per bed per week in debt interest, because these highly leveraged companies are coming in, buying up capital. They know the local authorities need to buy those beds, and effectively you're paying them to offshore that money to the Cayman Islands to pay companies that own there in fictional loans, effectively, to shift money around. So, isn't there a risk that if we pump more money into the system without changing that provider model, you're just going to see that leak out? I mean, why would they spend it on pay when they can quite happily, at the moment, fictionally create interest for themselves and then just shift the money overseas? So I'm sceptical about whether you're really going to get the outcomes you're looking for financially unless you change the type of providers in that marketplace. And I'm not really hearing that from government, particularly, or the panel.
Debate say, can we reimagine the social care market in the way that reflects their comfort, dignity, and all the rest of it? Any further questions?
Thank you. So, my name is Ishmael. I work for MENCAP. Regarding on social care, so when funding is being announced, how is going to divide between the elderly and people with learning disabilities? Because I sometimes feel when I come to events, they're more focused on elderly than people with learning disabilities, because it's also learning disabilities also need social care as well as much as elderly people. Thanks.
Anyone want to lead on? Izzy?
I'll pick up two. I mean, absolutely, your point is exactly what I was saying, and that's the problem. The way the financial markets have divested the assets and taken them offshore has created the massive disruption in the marketplace. I think there is change, but there's also a necessity of demand that we need to continue to deal with. So, when I took on social care in Warwickshire 2010, we had no extra care housing, and I was ambitious for that, largely because you look at the pie chart of what's going out, what's coming in, where the demand is coming from, and you know it's not going to match. So what we were able to do by delivering extra care housing, one, it is what people want because it's their own front door, but actually we could take out the hotel costs, so effectively deal with social care costs and do more of that. I still think, and particularly now, there is even more need and demand for that. Now we're coming out of COVID. There are a lot of people who are anxious about care homes and all of that. And we need to give confidence back, but we also need to afford the future of a growing ageing population. And to the point that was made by the gentleman from MENCAP, absolutely. We're in local government, we're nearly at 50% each for those the costs that are being spent on those with long-term needs, working age adults, as opposed to older people. The numbers are in the older people, but the high costs are in the working age adults, and they're there for a lifetime. And those lifetimes are, thankfully, now longer, but they do come with a price tag. So, we have to be able to understand, and I've said this and I've been shouted down, I think we need to be evaluating the costs separately, and it's not separately that I want them, but I want those working age adult costs out there and exposed so people understand the demand pressures that are coming through. We know who they are because they're in our children's services.
Thank you, Izzy. Elizabeth, would you like to come in on any of those points?
Yes, please. First of all, I agree with Izzy about the whole extra care housing thing. You're absolutely right. Everyone, wants to be at home or in a place where they can have extra care there. But the problem is then when they do go into proper care homes later, we're finding that people are coming, have, their needs are really, really high, which is unbelievably expensive. To go back to the gentleman about MENCAP, I absolutely agree with you 100% that we don't talk about people with disabilities enough. It's all about the elderly, and it's very rarely about people with disabilities. And as Izzy said, we see it from our children's services. So our need is quadrupling every 10 years of people coming in. So we know that down the track we're going to have to do have much greater provision for people with disabilities. But to come back to the people who are caring for those with disabilities, and I suppose I speak personally here because I had a sister with very severely learning difficulties with 2-to-1 care in a care home with five residents, so very small because it was very high need. But if you talk to those carers, you know, they're not getting paid an awful lot, and your competition is stacking the shelves in Tesco's, and frankly, sometimes that's quite attractive because you get paid more, you know when your shifts are, etc., and also you have something about career progression. We don't seem to have anything about saying to the young, well, you know, come in, work in this care home, you've got skills that you can use in other sectors. It's worth staying in. We can train you up. In 10 years, you could be a manager. It's got to be something like that. It's about the quality of care and exactly what Adele was saying about having qualifications. But it's also saying, do you know what? There's a career here, and what you do is a really, really worthwhile job. Because it's not, again, just about qualifications. It's about the type of person who is a caregiver. And frankly, the people I've met have been absolutely wonderful. So we need to keep them.
Many thanks, Elizabeth. Keith, Adele, anything you'd like to contribute on any of those issues just raised?
I'd like just to add on to what she's saying. Most of the time, we say that the care worker needs to be trained. I'd like to wonder out loudly, does it mean that all this time, all throughout these years and centuries and decades, we've been having people taking care of people and trained people? We've been putting our parents, our loved ones into the hands of unskilled workers. Because if we say this is an unskilled person, we've been, you know, like you're giving your mother to this person who cannot medicate them, who cannot give them activities, who cannot feed them, but you're it's like you're sacrificing your person. So the term even unskilled, I think is wrong. It's a wrong term to keep saying that these people are unskilled persons. When we say we want to train people, I think the term that they should be saying, like, let's give them refresher, because they're already qualified. Actually, they're overqualified. The care worker is actually an overqualified person. And I think maybe they're being paid less because they don't know where to rate them, because if you're too qualified, how do we pay you? So maybe we should just pay you nothing because we don't know what to do with you. That's the only thing. I think that's what I can add to that about training and everything else in terms of qualifications.
Thank you very much, Adele. Keith?
Yeah, thank you. Just briefly, one thing that's not, I think, been mentioned, unless I've missed it, is the piloting in various places of integrated social care, and how that might be part of the solution of looking at how we make sure that we guarantee that money gets into the pockets of care workers. I'm bound to say that one of the best ways that we can make sure that the money gets into the care workers' pockets is accrediting to the Living Wage Foundation and supporting local authorities to do that and to put that in the tendering process. And that is going to get easier to do now that we don't follow EU regulations on competition around tendering, or won't once the Green Paper goes through. But something else I don't think has been mentioned yet, and I think is really important, but it comes along the whole skills, like this is skilled work, and the myth around that there is, because it's disproportionately work that's done by women and by black and minority ethnic people. And it's often the case that there's an assumption that if work is done by women and black and minority ethnic people, it's probably not skilled work. Anyone who's watched Made in Dagenham back in the day will remember that was the implicit argument in that film. But there are huge amounts of skills used by care workers, managing medicines, managing budgets with people, working with families with often their own needs around the care of the patient. It's hugely skilled work. And it's skilled from day one. It's not that you have to, your first day as a care worker, you're using very complex skills. So our wages need to recognise that. People will leave. I lived with we had a family live with us in our home, a woman and her children. She was escaping domestic violence, and she came to live in our house. And she found a job as a care worker and found her vocation. And she thrived and loved it. She now works behind the tills at Primark. And that's because, well, for all the reasons you said. And I would love to see her get back into care, if only she could afford to, and get back in her calling. Yeah.
Many thanks. I have a question come through from our live stream. I think it's Francis Davis. Good question. Question to the panel. What would the panel think of a ring-fenced local precept to fund care and to pool care risk and costs by either locality or combined authority or group of London councils like Central London Forward, etc.? Does that sound like a good, bad and different idea to you, Izzy?
Well, sort of in effect, we have got that because we've got the adult social care precept. And you know, when it first came into being, I remember saying at that time, it will be raised disproportionately because, you know, in Kensington and Chelsea and arguably Warwickshire, we have a better tax base, so the rate is going to be bring in more money, but you know, not necessarily where the demand is. You know, we know that's the case. But if I'm going to raise it locally, I have to say I will defend the right to spend it locally, and you know, I will definitely not be arguing that it should be dispersed, which is what we do with central taxation, and then you know, the variability of where it may end up, which is actually has to follow need, is an accepted form of society. So I think the reality is, if you try to raise that precept locally, you won't get it where it's needed, in the volume it's needed. You'll have to have a very high tax, which will, you know, be disproportionate. So, you know, as society, we accept that we have to support the vulnerable in our society. I'm not a huge fan of the precept. I would have preferred it to have been done centrally, because I think arguably something like social care, it rises above local need. And so I always felt it should be done on a central basis. You know, it continues to be difficult. We do health on a central basis. We would never contemplate, I would argue, doing that on a local basis. But even now, I just, if we do not spend money on social care, we will end up having to pour more money into health. That it's a given. You know, we need to start looking at prevention and what we do locally in our area, and we need to spend it on social care and give a decent quality of life to those carers.
Thank you. Elizabeth, anything your thoughts on it?
I agree with Izzy, actually. And I think it's quite unusual, isn't it? I think we're the only country in Western Europe where the councils look after social care. You know, it's usually funded, it is funded centrally elsewhere. And as he says, you know, we already have the precept, right? You know, I think the government needs to pick up the tab for this one.
Thank you. Bring the microphone to the front. Thank you very much.
There's a gentleman there who's been lifting his hand up.
That
one, yeah. He's really been lifting his hand up.
So, where's he?
I'm just wondering what the panel think on a national register of carers, because you have that in Scotland and in Northern Ireland, but not in England. Would that be a good idea? Do you see a national register of carers? Do you think that's something we should have or not? I don't have a view myself.
Yes,
Do you have a question behind? I'm
The one with the pen, blue pen, that one. Yeah. You. Yeah. You.
Yes, go on.
Sorry, Richard Clare, Leader, Wiltshire Council. It's a bit of an unfair question, but as if this isn't a complicated enough issue as it is, we've got integrated care systems coming very soon. We have this concept of pooled budgeting, which brings me out in a cold sweat when I think about it in too much detail. It may be an advantage, it may not. I suspect the 5.4 billion the government's going to give to social care will all end up in a pooled budget, rather than being more specifically allocated. I could be wrong. But what's the impact of that going to be? And are there opportunities there? I've got the NHS who are very keen to train care workers all of a sudden, although they're not telling me what the cost will be yet. What are the ICSs going to do to change this environment further? Are they going to make it worse?
very much. Well, let's put that through the panel. Two questions. Register and what is the likely probable future we see from the integration game? Starting with you, please, Keith.
Thank you. So on a national register, so the Living Wage Foundation doesn't have a position on it like yourself, but the impression I get from care workers I've spoken to around the country is that a great deal of ambivalence about that from them, but no hard data on that. And on integrated social care and the impact of that, I wonder if part of that is just to show more the difference in wages between care workers who are part of the NHS and care workers who are part of contracted from local authorities. And you'll have care workers working in the same building or from the same place but and doing exactly the same job but paid differently. And I think that will put more pressure, more political pressure on us to make sure we pay a voluntary living wage, at least for care workers.
Thank you, Keith.
The integrated care systems and social care, I mean, I think it's going to be a real issue for us, actually. Certainly in central London, it's going to be a huge issue because we're all being amalgamated into a big northwest London block, which at the moment has a massive deficit, whereas our bit's in surplus. So that will be very tricky. And I do see, frankly, the NHS sort of giving us quite a lot of the work that they would have done, you know, because they're always trying to cut costs too. So usually I'm quite a cheerful person, but this one I do think may be quite a challenge.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Adele, I
think I'll take a pass.
You're welcome to.
If I say anything, Jonathan, it will just be care work, because I'm a care worker also. We are skilled. We love our job. We don't want to be overtrained because we are already skilled enough. We want refresher courses. And I just want a voluntary living wage. I mean, that's the only thing, that's the message I want just to put across.
Oh, well reinforced. That's a good enough answer for me. Well done. Izzy,
I'm fairly ambivalent about a register. Whenever these sort of things come up, I have to say, so what are we going to get that's better out of it? I don't know. And may I just say that you've already got social care workforce working in different environments at different rates. So, you know, that is a given already, particularly when you look at health sector versus local government. Richard, on the ICS, it's 5 years on. It's probably about time that the National Health had another reorganisation. So, you know, there we are. So I've obviously been around too long, and I'm cynical about that. This is about health, reorganising themselves. The ICPs, if you want to get into the acronym sort of syndrome, is where we fit slightly, but arguably even then, I think as a lesser player, do I dare say lesser player, you know, and don't allow it to be a lesser player. You know, frankly, we have the mandate in local government. We are elected to represent our communities and their views and their needs. And the health sector isn't, and nor do the bureaucrats who sit in the health sector and decide that it's going to be an ICS or an STP or a whatever acronym this year happens to bring along. Do not listen to the people who actually have the problem in accessing health. If we pour money into the health sector, it is a black pit that you will continue to have to do. If you start to look at the prevention agenda, that once you trip into the world of social care versus health, there is an 80% access that is in the social care world, in local government, 20% of it is spent in the high-cost area of health. We need to put more people in this side, in the prevention side, which, by the way, talking about training staff, it takes less time to train a social worker than it does a GP, a doctor, or a health member. So it is false money, and you will end up just pouring more and more down that black pit.
time for a very short question, because we're going to wrap up on time, please. Short question or statement, please, sir.
I'm a doctor. I work for Sue Ryder, a national charity. We have hospices and neurological centres, and we do bereavement care as well. You mentioned, Izzy, about health wouldn't be paid on a local basis. It just made me think about the fact that when I'm looking after patients in my hospice, we have to sell second-hand clothes to be able to pay for their care. So there are some elements of good health care for patients and families that isn't properly funded. This is such an important job that carers do. We need to value them better as a society. We've got an ageing population, and we're not going to have the carers to go around. I don't know if what words the panel can say about how we value these incredibly important people better in society.
Thank you very much. And upon which statement, I think coming up to 1 o'clock and lunchtime, I'm going to call it a day for now. We'll take questions informally afterwards, but I think we need to be the Ryanair of think tanks, always on time with a fanfare, and maybe a lottery where we're not going to win everything. Can I ask us all to give it up? Huge thanks to our fantastic panel. Huge thanks to Keith, the Living Wage Foundation, to Francis Davis, who can't be with us today. Sadly, he's come down with COVID, but for giving us the seed for this idea. And let's now take this agenda forward in our work in the conference elsewhere. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.